I asked on my Instagram story if people could submit some questions that they would want to, excuse me, that they would want to hear from a bearded dragon breeder. So here are kind of the ones that I got. But first, would you just want to tell us a little bit about Seventh Galaxy Dragons and how you got started?
Yeah, sure. It started as I just got one bearded dragon from Petco. I just was like walking around. I thought they looked pretty cool. I never even really heard of one, honestly. This was about 6 or 7 years ago now. And I bought one and I brought it home and I just fell in love with the species.
Hmm.
When I was younger, I really like snakes and I grew up in South Florida where there's a ton of different reptiles down here,
Right.
lizards and snakes and turtles and stuff. I was always into them as a kid, but never had a bearded dragon. So about six
Okay.
or 7 years ago, I was walking around Petco. I saw one and I just bought it like spur of the moment purchase. I brought it home and I just absolutely fell in love with the species. I thought they were so cool. Like such a cool personality, docile. And I raised it up from a baby. And after it was full grown, about a year, I started like bringing it places with me, the beach, parks,
Yeah.
over friends' house, hanging out. And I just like thought it was so cool that like it was just like an ideal pet for me.
Oh,
Um, so after having the bearded dragon, her name was Rocket. I After having her for about 2 years, I decided to get a male and potentially breed them.
right.
So I looked online and I started looking into breeders. I found a breeder online and I found a male that I would potentially like to breed with her. So once that male, his name was Comet, by the way, he was a hypo leatherback.
Awesome.
Um, s- so once that male was about a year old of age, I went ahead and started like looking into breeding, researching it a lot, obviously, before doing it,
Oh,
and I just went ahead and dove in and started. And after she had her first clutch, and I went through all of the motions, learning a lot along the way. I just thought it was like such a cool process. So I started looking
yeah.
into other breeders and like really like researching the the hobby and the industry as a whole and seeing where I could potentially fit in and what I'd like to do with it. And I noticed that it was just like really scattered. The bearded dragon breeder industry, like private breeders, it's sort of like all over the place. It's like mostly
Mhm.
exists on like social media. I noticed, and I thought, you know what? There's not a ton of breeders out there, and there's not a lot of info or like breeders that I thought were doing it on a level that was like very like educational
Right.
and like really like sort of complementing the hobby of like exotic bearded dragons. So like during this process I was like learning about all of the morphs like trans and donners and zeros and whiplets and stuff. There's not too many in bearded dragons too, which I like that it's kind of limited and like people could like pick up on the hobby easier than let's say
Uh-huh.
snakes where there's hundreds
Right.
of different types. So yeah, I just really got into it. And I just went ahead and started investing in, other quality dragons, different bloodlines, trying out different breeders and sort of testing the way that they did business and sort of how they treated their own customers, just like a lot of research, slowly buying dragons and breeding them. And after 1 or 2 years, I ended up with 15 or 20 or so different dragons that I was going to raise up
Wow.
as breeders. This was about I'd say 4 or 5 years ago at
Okay.
this point. And yeah, so that was my start of bearded dragon breeding. It was just strictly out of passion, loving the species, which it still is today, honestly. I really just love these guys. I don't mess with any other reptile species. I just want to focus on bearded dragons. I still think that they're just the ideal pet, especially when it comes to reptiles.
Yeah, that's awesome. They are such great pets. Like you mentioned, they're super docile, so they'll hang out with you, unlike, say, a leopard gecko or some of the other small lizards. They are a great pet.
For sure.
So, how many bearded dragons do you have at this point?
It's always shifting around. Currently, I probably have about probably 25 to 30 breeders, sub-adult range. And then as far as babies, it's like shifting every day. I'll breed
Right.
them, I'll have clutches, I'll sell some, and some more are born. So right now, I just like sold out of my last clutch for the year. I'm not gonna have any more until springtime. But yeah, babies I
Okay.
probably have like 5 or 6 left. But a couple months ago I had, probably like 100, 120 or so.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so are bearded dragons like leopard geckos or something where you can only breed them certain times a year, or could you breed them at any time of year?
So they are sort of seasonal in the wild, and
Okay.
especially in like states that have seasons. Florida
Mhm.
doesn't really have seasons. We have
Right.
like 1 month of 70-degree Fahrenheit weather, and it's not really seasonal at all. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm able to breed them all year. Some of my
Okay.
adults do go into brumation.
Right.
I'd say only like 25% of them go into brumation,
Mhm.
which if some of your viewers aren't aware,
Right.
it's when some reptiles go in like a hibernation mode for usually like 1 to 3 months,
Yeah.
and they just get like really sleepy and like hide, which like makes it easier on the breeders, honestly. Where like you don't necessarily have to care for them as much, with like
Right.
husbandry and feeding. But
Mhm.
I really don't mind. I like love doing this every day. It's like sort of like a
Mhm.
meditation for me, just to like
Yeah.
take an hour or two every single day, feed them all individually, clean up after them. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, one of my viewers on Instagram asked, how much time and money does it take to care for that many bearded dragons?
So I'd say it takes probably about an hour to 2 hours every day, between feeding them and cleaning up, bathing them. I usually bathe my adults twice a week, babies usually 3 times a week.
Mhm.
Um, as far as the money part, depends on what you're feeding, depends on the babies, really. I mean, babies
Right.
require a lot more money because they
Mhm.
need a lot of smaller bugs. And generally, the smaller bugs cost just as much as the larger bugs. So,
Mhm.
if like you have a clutch of 30 babies and they all need, let's say 5 to 10 small crickets every day, you're going through thousands of crickets a week, just for
Right.
one clutch.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it really varies, when it's like in season, let's say like spring, summertime, when I have a lot of babies, generally, the costs are a lot higher because
Right.
of, getting a lot of crickets, a lot of smaller bugs, a lot of greens for them. But
Mhm.
when it's not as busy and I don't have too many babies, the adults are pretty easy. Always keep like a lot of super worms on hand. Super worms are great. They're very low cost.
Mhm.
Um, you don't want to feed too much to the adults, especially if they're sort of overweight. You want to watch that because they are very
Right.
fatty. But
Mhm.
super worms are a great staple for them. Mealworms are better for adults that are more overweight because they're less fatty. And
Yeah.
again, they're pretty easy to keep. They don't stay good for as long though because they turn into beetles much sooner. Which if you keep the two, you'll realize that superworms
Right.
will stay good for months, even more, whereas mealworms only last like a week to 2 weeks before they start to turn into beetles.
Yeah. Do you get your crickets and other feeder insects from a local supplier or do you order them online?
I do order them online. I choose to go with Armstrong Cricket Farm.
Okay.
They have two locations. They have one in the Midwest. I believe it's in Texas or maybe Louisiana. And then they have another one in Georgia, which is right above Florida. So I get them in
Right.
one business day with
Oh,
UPS, which
awesome.
is great. I,
Mhm.
just from regular UPS ground, I get them next day. So
Wow.
that actually helps a lot as far as the survival rate, keeping shipping costs down, and all that.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm lucky I live in a place where dubia roaches are legal because they're kind of my staple with all of my reptiles. But yeah, I guess that's probably not an option since they're illegal in Florida.
Exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, they are illegal here. They are a great source of calcium. Sorry,
Hmm.
protein
Hmm.
for them. Doobie roaches are great. I am able to feed discoid roaches, which I do
Right.
have a colony here too, so that helps. I feed a lot of crickets. All of my adults and babies get crickets. That's probably the
Yeah.
largest expense that I have with bearded dragons in general, is just buying, thousands of crickets every week. But they are very healthy for them. They're not fatty at all. They're full of water, so they're great for bearded dragons hydration,
Yeah.
and obviously they stimulate their appetite when they're bouncing around the cage. Obviously it's like really good for the
Yeah.
babies to hunt, and it's good for the adults to move around and get some exercise hunting them.
Uh-huh. So what are some of the staple greens that you'll feed your adult and juvenile bearded dragons?
The main greens I stick to are arugula and mixed spring greens. I usually buy the containers you get at like grocery stores, the little plastic containers.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I feed the mixed spring greens and arugula, and sometimes I'll switch around to some kale, some
Right.
bok choy, any like leafy greens.
Hmm.
We also do cilantro. It's good.
Yeah. So a lot of people, like I probably had 6 people ask in the questions box, what is your opinion as someone who has worked with a lot of bearded dragons on loose substrates? A controversial
So
topic.
yeah, so definitely don't recommend for babies at all,
Right.
for obvious reasons, compaction being number one. For adults, like full-grown adults, it's pretty much okay from what I hear. I never use it. I don't like to take any chances at all.
Right.
When you're dealing with so many, like you want to
Hmm.
minimize the risk on any potential harmful things. So
Yeah.
I I really just use paper. It's really easy to clean up and keep the tank clean. And yeah, I think it's fine for adults. I have had one adult on sand and they did perfectly fine from my experience, but for
Yeah.
babies I do not recommend at all.
What is your favorite breeding pair that you currently have, and what's your favorite that you've had in the past?
Favorite breeding pair, that's kind of a tough one, man, because it's always changing, it's always
Yeah.
evolving. um hmm. I really like the blue bar projects that I did this year.
Hmm.
I had like 2 or 3 different blue bar projects. I believe your girl's from one of them.
Yeah.
So Jupiter was the father of those, and he's
Hmm.
he's a really unique looking blue bar dunner from
Yeah, he's
originally
really cool.
from Kids and Dragons, which is another breeder out of Texas who does really nice blue bar projects for a while. So
Hmm.
I did him with a few different blue bar females that I had, and yeah, I was really happy with the way those babies came out. I really like blue, the different variety of blue between donors and normal scales. The different
Yeah.
patterns are really cool.
Blue bars are super cool.
Yeah, and I'm always focusing on zeros. Into next year, I'm probably gonna be doing mostly zeros. They seem to be in the highest demand, and I really focus on breeding healthy zeros because unfortunately, I don't know if you or your audience is aware, but there's a lot of unhealthy zeros out there.
Hmm.
Um, Breeders that are not doing it for the right reasons, are just trying to make money and breed as many zeros as possible because they're in high
Right.
demand,
Hmm.
and they're just not sticking to breeding for health, which is very important for the hobby in general. We don't want to put a lot of
Right.
sick animals out there, and it's
Hmm.
and it's just really important for breeders working with customers to really make sure that they're getting healthy animals that are going to live healthy long lives.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so that's really what I'm focusing on now, is just breeding strong zero lines, experimenting a lot, making sure the zeros are strong because it is a newer morph. So they're,
Hmm.
you really got to take your time with it and hold back a lot of babies and see how they do
Yeah.
before releasing those lines.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's one thing that I think is especially different with bearded dragons than leopard geckos. There's a lot of newer morphs in leopard geckos, and it seems like the market is super saturated with them. So I think it's good that with newer morphs and bearded dragons, you are holding some of those back to make sure that they are going to be genetically sound.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's definitely a good a good way to put it too.
Yeah. So I know you've kind of touched on this, but what would be your absolute favorite morph of bearded dragon?
My favorite, I'm gonna go with everybody else's favorite, which seems to be zeros.
Yeah, they
I
are
love
gorgeous.
how they have that like sort of like supernatural look to them, that like paper white
Yeah,
look that like you just don't see out in nature. It's like something of like, outer space, which
right.
goes along with my name, Seventh Galaxy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I really like the look of them, the hypo zero specifically, that's paper white. Uh,
Uh-huh.
the the normal zeros are super cool too. They're gray, more on the silver end. Those are also awesome, but
Right.
just the hypo zeros are probably my favorite.
Awesome. That's a great choice.
Yeah.
So a couple people wanted to know, is breeding bearded dragons your full-time job?
No, it's not actually. I have a couple other businesses that I built up over the years. I
Okay.
still consider this a hobby.
Hmm.
It's between the time and money that I put into it, I wouldn't say it's like a highly profitable business.
Right.
Hopefully one day I could turn it into that. Hopefully soon,
Hmm.
maybe even starting next year, I could start to be profitable doing it. But
Hmm.
it's really difficult to do it full time without another source of income.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many costs that go into caring for really any reptile, so it would be very difficult to have enough return on that to make it full-time.
Exactly. And like I'm sure there's people that are able to do it.
Hmm.
But to do it right and really feed them properly, I like to give a variety of bugs to all of my dragons. So to keep those all
Right.
on hand, it does get costly, and obviously the time factor, it takes, a couple hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year,
Right.
you got to be available for that. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely takes time and money.
Hmm. One thing I really wanted to compliment you on with Seventh Galaxy Dragons is the educational side of that. Your care guides and stuff on your website are outstanding, and I think it's awesome that you are educating your customers, whereas like some other reptile breeders would just be like, here's your animal, figure out how to take care of it. But you can tell that you do care enough about the animals to put together those resources.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was one of the biggest things that I wanted to touch on when I started breathing, was actually educating the consumer and building the hobby up from an educational standpoint.
Hmm.
So I made most of my videos maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I made them to stand the test of time, so like people
Hmm.
could watch them 5, 10 years from now and still have a great awareness of how to take care of these guys.
Yeah.
It's just like answering a lot of common questions too, like
Hmm.
if like anybody has any questions about potentially buying a bearded dragon, like they could learn how to care for them before pulling the trigger.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I bet it does save you a lot of time because instead of having to type out an answer each time someone's like, how do I do this? You can be like, oh, I actually have a whole care guide. And even people who aren't specifically going to buy from you, they can still learn from those resources, which is great.
Exactly. Anybody who purchases a dragon from me, I always recommend they read the whole care page on my site, but I'm also very big on customer service.
Hmm.
I really love to I really love to share my knowledge. So anybody who buys a dragon from me specifically, I'll give you 24/7 customer service. Like call me, text me, email me anytime you want. Ask as many questions as you want, and I am here to answer any and all of your questions as soon as I can. That's
Hmm.
really big for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that definitely makes you stand out from other breeders.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that.
So, what is kind of your daily care routine with this many bearded dragons? Like, do you have to start early in the morning or?
That's a good question. So, wake up. Lights go on for my guys at around 6:30 a.m. and I feed 2 hours after lights on. So that gives them
Mhm.
time to warm up, get their
Yeah,
metabolism going, heat up. And so I start off feeding them greens first. Everybody gets greens first. So they're not being as picky and just eating
right.
the bugs, right? That's like a little trick that I like to share with people to get their
Hmm.
dragons to eat greens because obviously they're going to go for bugs over greens naturally. Um, so start off with greens, and then once everybody gets their rounds of greens, I go right into the bugs. Usually
Yeah,
feed the babies first because the babies have to eat 3 times a day, whereas adults usually just eat once. Sub-adults or juveniles eat twice a day, but babies
hmm,
need to eat 3 times a day. So I usually start off with them, and then I'll make my way up to the juveniles or sub-adults, and then the adults get fed. I do 2 or 3 rounds of different bugs. Every dragon, you obviously get to know them
hmm,
day by day. Maybe their diet switches, maybe they get a little picky, they like one bug over another.
right.
So you really get to know each dragon and their diets and what they prefer. So you just like make your rounds with different bugs. Some dragons like all bugs, some dragons just like crickets or just like roaches or just like worms.
Yeah.
So another really good worm I forgot to mention was a black soldier fly larva.
Oh,
Those are
yeah.
really healthy. They're really high in calcium, so you don't need to dust them with calcium
Yeah.
powder. They naturally produce the calcium. So those are a really good staple feeder too for bearded dragons. But
Yeah.
yeah, so for the routine, it's just greens first, bugs second. Um, in the late afternoon, usually, let's say they get fed by 9 o'clock. The late afternoon, usually between 3 or 4 p.m., I will feed again. I'll do another round of feeding for the babies,
Yeah.
juveniles, and then lights go off usually around 7 p.m.
Hmm.
So it's like more or less a 12-hour cycle, lights on, lights off,
Yeah.
similar to the natural light we get outside, try
Hmm.
to mimic that for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to share about your business, Seventh Galaxy Dragons?
Yeah, please, just if anybody's ever interested in a dragon, don't be shy. Message me, email me. I am the one answering all of the questions, emails, everything. And I'm always happy to share my knowledge, answer any questions you might have about bearded dragons. Whether you buy from me or not, I'm just always happy to share info and knowledge about them. I'm super passionate about the species. That's why I continue to do it every day, and I will do it as long as I can. Honestly,
Yeah,
I
that's
really, really love
awesome.
these guys.
Yeah, so everyone be sure to go check out Seventh Galaxy Dragons.
Awesome. Thanks, Hunter. This was
Yeah,
a really great interview. And thank you for doing what you do, man. You're super passionate about reptiles, and it's just really cool to see young kids like you living their passion, starting young, doing what they
thank you.
love. It's
I
great.
appreciate that. Yeah, it is definitely my passion, and I'm hoping to be doing this for a long time. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.